The King is said to be extremely unhappy with Keir Starmer for handing Donald Trump an invitation to Balmoral so publicly, as it conflicted with his aim to protect Canada from Trump's threats.
A little bit of breaking news from Buckingham Palace. They've said His Majesty has known President Trump for many years and looks forward to hosting him and the First Lady later this year.
Well, we know that. He's coming in September. We've known for ages.
Andrew Pearce, have you just undermined our breaking news?
It's not breaking news. We've known for ages.
Well, listen, Cameron Walker is here with the breaking news to explain why this is relevant.
He gave him the invitation in the White House.
Well, so there's been a bit of confusion over this invitation in the White House. Right. My sources tell me King Buckingham Palace not happy with Sir Keir Starmer, that he handed over that letter to the King in front of, to the President even in front of the cameras. That was meant to be a private visit, inviting him in the summer to Balmoral for the King to discuss a state visit later on in President Trump's terms. Now, from my understanding, the King, it was reported in the Times this morning, but from my understanding, the King was a little bit cautious about inviting Trump so soon for a state visit, given what he'd said about Canada wanting to become the 51st state of the United States of America. And, of course, that puts the King in a constitutionally problematic situation because he is King of Canada and the United Kingdom. But, of course, he has to act on the advice of the United Kingdom. Anyway, fast forward to the last couple of minutes, and the Palace has confirmed to me that the official invitation was handed over to the White House last week. And as you said, that statement from a palace spokesperson says His Majesty has known President Trump for many years and looks forward to hosting him and the First Lady later this year. And as you said, Andrew, that is expected to be September as President Trump.
Fascinating. I could never understand how it was going to be a successful diplomatic operation when we'd had the President of the United States trying to turn Canada into the 51st state, and that is the King's realm. Yeah,
well, it's a huge conundrum, isn't it? Because from Keir Starmer's perspective, the Prime Minister, he wants the King to essentially butter up President Trump because Trump has a huge fascination with the royal family, a huge love for the royal family. So the King rolling out the red carpet for President Trump at Windsor Castle is huge kudos for Sir Keir Starmer because it does strengthen that diplomatic relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States, perhaps leading for better trade deals, perhaps leading to better relations when President Trump is perhaps slightly more hostile towards the European Union, for example. But at the same time, Mark Carney in Canada incredibly disappointed, or he says the Canadians incredibly disappointed with the UK government for inviting President Trump for a state visit.
And the idea if he'd gone up to Balmoral, President Trump would not have wanted to be buried away in the wilds of Scotland.
No, so he is expected to be in this summer at his golf course in Aberdeenshire, Turnberry, which is only an hour away from Balmoral Castle. And that was meant to be kind of informal discussions about the state's visit, planning it together, that sort of thing, for a year or two's time. But it looks like from the Prime Minister wants that state visit to happen sooner rather than later. And we have had confirmation from the Palace in the last few minutes that it will definitely be happening, a full bells and whistles state visit for President Trump this September.
The most surprising bit of that story, Cameron, is the fact that King Charles did not give Keir Starmer permission to hand over that obsequious kind of that invitation on the global stage in the White House.
Yes.
So King Charles was sat at home watching that and went, hang on a minute.
No one told me.
No, you weren't supposed to do that in public. That was a private gesture. So either Keir Starmer has misunderstood the nature of that invitation,
I think he
cares so little about what King Charles thinks that he used it to his advantage and leveraged that relationship with it.
It's the latter.
A Palace told the Times the idea was that the letter would be handed over in private to Donald Trump at the same time that he is reminded or encouraged not to bring up the 51st state of the United States of America.
And I wonder if he'd have dared to have done that, Starmer, if we still had Queen Elizabeth on the throne. He'd been a monarch for 70-odd years. I doubt it.
We're not sure.
Thank you, Cameron.
Fascinating, Cameron.
Keir Starmer had tried to pull out the stops to win Trump over with the invite earlier this year.
This is a letter from His Majesty the King. It's an invitation for a second state visit. This is really special.
World leaders in general have been falling over their feet to appease Donald Trump since his return to the White House. Just today, the NATO chief called him Daddy.
They're not going to be fighting each other. They've had it. They've had a big fight, like two kids in a schoolyard. You know, they fight like hell. You can't stop them. Let them fight for about 2-3 minutes, then it's easier to stop them.
And then Daddy has to sometimes do strong language.
You have to use strong language. Every once in a while you have to use a certain word.
Tom Harwood asked where this would end.
James Sunderland, I'm interested to get your thoughts on how Donald Trump is being treated at this summit. There's a huge charm offensive, perhaps not always genuine, has a little bit of disingenuity, perhaps, with regards to it. Mark Rutte, the chief, NATO chief, calling him the daddy.
I've never seen sycophancy like it. It's extraordinary, isn't it? If you look at the way in which Trump has been lauded and feted by many world leaders in the last few months, quite clearly he's a man of influence. He is the president of the most powerful country in the world. He's got plenty of money. He's making bold decisions in the Middle East. Suddenly, everybody wants to be Donald Trump's friend. And, of course, there is a real risk that the US might pull out of NATO. Trump's made it quite clear already the fact that the US is less interested in Ukraine, perhaps, than it has previously been under Biden. So I think Trump is a man that we have to do business with. And I think that you get on the right side of Trump, who knows what might happen for your country.
I mean, it is extraordinary. The Prime Minister, when he went to the Oval Office, said, here's a letter from the King, yes. An unprecedented second state visit. Chancellor Merz of Germany gifted Donald Trump the birth certificate, I think, of his grandfather or great-grandfather, who I think was called Trumpf or something like that, from Germany, where they originally emigrated from. And now we have Mark Rutte saying Donald Trump is the daddy. I mean, how much lower can these world leaders go, grovelling on their knees before a man who, let's be frank, they don't really respect? No.
I said, that's not what we said.
Emmanuel Macron has tried to project an image of a bromance with Trump. But these images from the G7 meeting of Italian PM Giorgia Meloni rolling her eyes suggest the fawning is instrumental rather than real. No. King Charles had been keen to stand up for Canada after Trump called for his northern neighbour to join the US. A mission Sir Keir Starmer seems to have undermined. In the Italian Parliament earlier this year, Charles reiterated that he was the King of Canada, a clear message intended for Trump.
My grandfather, King George VI, visited British and Allied troops in July and August 1944, staying at an HQ near Arezzo. Tomorrow, in Ravenna, as King of the United Kingdom and of Canada, I will have the great honour of commemorating the 80th anniversary of the liberation of that province, together with President Mattarella.
And the King posted online support for the maple flag. Yet when asked in the Commons, Keir Starmer said he hadn't had time to address Canada with Trump.
Welcome to hear the Prime Minister acknowledge the contribution of Canada to Ukraine's self-defence and its status as a vital ally for the UK. Last week, the Prime Minister was asked in the US by the press about President Trump's repeated calls for Canada to become a state within the US. The PM answered that he and Trump didn't address that issue, didn't address Canada. Yet, wasn't his meeting a good opportunity to remind President Trump about sovereignty, independence, including that of Canada?
Yes, but it's a serious point. In the time we had available, I was most anxious to discuss the question of security guarantees, and that's why I devoted the vast amount of time I had there. But on the question of Canada, I think we should be absolutely clear. Canada is a vital ally to the United Kingdom, to the Commonwealth, and has played a leading part in relation to Ukraine, not least on the vital training that they have provided. And we should be very proud of what the Canadians have done.
Now a wedge between the King and his Prime Minister, Donald Trump's visit later this year could prove troublesome for the coherence of the UK government policy. But using the pull of the royal family to placate the president remains appealing.
That they don't know what they're doing. Do you understand that?
Yesterday, Donald Trump blew up at reporters over Israel and Iran's conflict. But this morning, he seemed pleased, having been treated to an evening with the Dutch royal family. Nicholas Dunning, GB News.